Welcome to the Mawazo Ideas podcast, where we delve into the inspiring journeys and groundbreaking research of African women researchers shaping the future of the continent. Previously known as the Nairobi Ideas podcast, the Mawazo Ideas podcast goes beyond the research, featuring untold stories from brilliant African women researchers from across the continent. We delve into their everyday realities, their challenges and triumphs, and the solutions they are pioneering for a brighter African future. So tune in every week to explore their innovative ideas, discuss their impact on the continent's development, and celebrate African women's contribution to academia, innovation, and society at large.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Mawazo Ideas Podcast Season 7. I'm your host, Sylvia Mwendia.
And I am Catherine Amai, the Voices Program Associate here at the Mawazo Institute.
Yes, and my role here at the Mawazo Institute is I am the Voices Program Officer. In today's episode, we'll be exploring research academia, but from a youth lens and a youth perspective. And to help us navigate this episode and answer the various pertinent questions, we are joined by Dr. Moses Ngware, a senior research scientist at the African Population Health Research Center. Karibu sana, Daktari. Perhaps you could start off by telling us about your experience in research academia. We are aware that you have a wealth of experience over 20 years, and specifically in as relates to young people.
Okay, thank you, Sylvia and Catherine, for having me here. It's a pleasure. And my name is Moses Ngware. I've been working with APHRC for the last 18 years. I've been in research for more than 20 years, done lots and lots of survey, impact evaluations and all that within the continent, Africa. And my journey started quite a while before I got to where I am. When I did my PhD, finished by the age of 35. I'm told if you are 35, that's the exit point for a young person. But that's when probably we are finishing to be molded to be researchers. Quite interesting. But then, of course, having had some opportunities to engage along the way, to engage with research, meet great people, work with great teams, work in great institutions, then you get to where I am.
Great. Great. Thank you so much for that elaborate introduction, Daktari. And so to start us off, based on your research, how are young people navigating the African research ecosystem? If you could paint us a picture, what does it look like?
Interesting question. The research ecosystem vis-a-vis young people in the continent. There are two things that come into mind when young people engage in various activities. One is the reality of the technology. Regardless of which sector we want young people to engage in, regardless of which kind of ecosystem you are looking at, the issue of technology will not go away. And they participate in that kind of ecosystem through technology many times.
Okay.
The other context that we don't run away from is the need for employment for young people. Okay. If you talk to any young person or networks of young people, they'll tell you that's of concern. That's an important thing to think about. So when then you get into research, those are the kind of two things that you'll see happening in terms of the way young people engage in with research. They want it as part of employment so that they can build a career in there, and they also enter there also as a way of they have certain skills to offer, to provide. They have something that they can bring that has not always been there, like using technology. That's how I see young people, of course, engaging. But of course, for the people who provide the opportunities, of course, we have other kind of thinking about the young people. For example, we want them to come and support with certain activities within the research ecosystem. For example, like generating the data in terms of collecting it, in terms of going out to the field with the research tools and all that, to collect and to bring that data to the fore.
Right, and just still to stick on that question. What would you say the role they primarily play in the research ecosystem? It sounds more like they are the research rather than the researchers. Are young people, are they researching? And by young people here, I'm sticking to the under 35 definition, but also we're very interested to hear what that definition even looks like for in academia, which might be a bit older. So maybe perhaps tell us about the role young people play. Researchers, are they researched?
Okay, interesting question. Maybe we could unpack the whole thing about the age in research, all right? And then we see now what role do they play. Now, ideally, we see the policy, we see programs, we even see legal instruments that try to define the age of a young person, or who we call the youth, which is sometimes 15 to 35. In research, sometimes we disaggregate that, and we can look at 15 to 24, you can look at 25 to 30, you can look at 31 to 35, and all that. And all these have various implications. And the reason being, the ones that are probably below 25, they are more likely to be in tertiary institutions. They are more likely to be in the pipeline for being a researcher. Okay?
Yes.
There could be others that are not in training, and they could be, again, the ones that we also engage at that age in terms of collecting the data. But when they finish their training, again, there are opportunities that are out there that are provided for young people to engage in research. For example, in the institution where I work, the African Population and Health Research Center, we do have like a cadre that we call research officers. I think more than 85% are below 35 years. And they engage in research. They are mentored, they are trained, they also get opportunities to lead in research. But apart from that, and we can come back to this, we also have opportunities like for interns. And at ABHLC, we have more than 50 interns at any single year. And they will be different. Most likely they will be different when you come to the next year, meaning we are providing opportunities for young people to engage in research. But if we go back to, again, the issue of age vis-a-vis what it means to be a young researcher. In Africa, again, if you look, you'll find those who are completing their PhD, mainly in their 50s, others in their 60s. It's like...
And that's the mean age.
This is it.
Wow.
That's the mean age.
Wow.
Okay? Of course, we do have some that are below 35. That's good. I just give you an example. When I finished my PhD, I was at 35.
Yes.
Meaning there are others that are actually finishing below that, which is a good thing. But when you look at the mean age, then you know how that kind of a thing looks like in terms of... So, when then we say youth in research, we prefer probably to say maybe people who are in their early career, early career researchers. And they could be over 35 years because they may have just finished their PhDs at 40s. So they are starting their career. But then going back to your other question on where exactly, how do they use them? What do they do in research? I think we find more young people, especially the one that I've mentioned of the 20-year-olds, early 30s, we engage them more in data collection. I told you at ABHRC, we do more than that.
Yes.
But when you go to the ecosystem, you'll find that their role is mainly to collect the data, which is something that we think can change and should change. And especially if you look at it from informal knowledge generation.
Yes.
Research is a little bit elitist.
Yes.
You know who does research?
Exactly.
All over the world. Oh, these are dons from the universities. These are people from institutions. These are the likes of Moses. That is elitist. That's the formal way of doing research. But when you look at young people,
Yes.
young people can really, really help generate knowledge through informal systems. Unfortunately, of course, right now, research is still formal. Of course, we will get to that point where you can still get credible evidence, but you use the informal knowledge system. Just the same way you talk about the informal sector. In research, you hardly talk about that.
Yes.
But there is a lot of things that can be done, and young people can really provide a good opportunity, given their use of technology, given their spread all over, and they can really help in that. But back to your question again,
yes,
many times we use them to collect the data, but it's something that we all of us need to think about so that we can go beyond just collecting the data.
Yes, Dr. You were just painting us a picture of the landscape of how young people are navigating research in the African research ecosystem and what that looks like in terms of definition of youth versus early career researcher. Given the numbers you've been able to share with us, what does that look like demographically and even across the continent? Maybe what does it look like for a young or early career male researcher versus a woman, socioeconomic context? What do those numbers look like demographically across the continent?
Okay, interesting. I say interesting because of, if you look at the research productivity, Sylvia, in Africa, we produce less than 1%. And 1%, and remember, we are now more than 1.6 billion, okay, in Africa. But we produce less than 1% of the research outputs in the entire world, okay?
Yeah.
Why is that kind of a situation? So one, before I go to the balance between men and women, one is if you look at the ratio of researchers to the population in Africa is very, very low. And that's how we sometimes measure, in schools. In school, we measure enrollment.
Yes.
We say enrollment is this level. In research, we say how many researchers do you have in 1 million of your population. Okay? In Africa, we have, if I may look at the health sector alone, all right? And that's the one that we think is doing very well. In Africa, we have 20 researchers for every 1 million.
Wow, that is really wanting.
In Europe, it's about 246. You can see a huge difference. Okay? Other areas, places in the world, they have different. Southeast Asia is something like 40 in every 1 million. So that one explains again why we are having this very low productivity. Now, then imagine then here you have a young person who probably is disadvantaged and wants to enter into that field. Already you can tell that it's not easy to get to enter into that field and probably become an accomplished researcher so that you get into those kind of numbers. Okay? So that's one. If you look at number of students that we have within our universities that are doing let's say undergraduate, masters, and PhD. In Africa, there are about 14, 15 million. In the whole world, we have about 220 million or thereabout.
Right.
So we are almost 6 to 7%. Again, you can see the numbers. We don't have really the numbers based on the kind of things that we would like to research in Africa, based on where you want them to be. And that also explains the kind of, I've not even touched about the capacity itself to do research. I've just provided the numbers. If you go to specific countries in Africa, for example, Kenya alone has about 40,000, okay, in terms of students that are enrolled in masters and in PhD.
Right.
Okay, and these are all the universities, regardless of whether they are public or private.
Yeah.
Okay, and and probably you might say that maybe that's one of the countries that are doing very well in Africa. If you go to countries like Ethiopia, for example, you'll find 90 researchers in every 1 million people. You go to countries like Egypt, does very well in the continent.
Yes.
Something to celebrate, more than 800.
Wow.
Okay.
Yes.
I think they have invested a lot in higher education. Okay. If you go to countries like Mali, like Nigeria, they are below that.
Yes.
Researchers for every 1 million people. Of course, a country like Nigeria is huge, has more than 200 million. So you see, even when Kenya probably has more than that, but Nigeria has a huge population. So these are, when you go then to men and women, I don't have the actual statistics, but we do know that women are disadvantaged. They constitute less than 30% of the numbers that we are talking about within the research ecosystem. And more so when you are looking at STEM, science, technology,
engineering
and mathematics. Okay, that's where the numbers are very, very, very low when you talk about women. And there are reasons that explain this. Some could be cultural. For example, they have to bring up the family, for example, and that interrupts the education. It interrupts also the career, and it's an important thing that has to be done within the society. And this is why, again, going back to the issue of the age, sometimes we like talking about early career, experience rather than the age, because when is the woman going to bring up the family, and when is he going to follow the career? And you find sometimes some of those things are interrupted.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Dr. for painting us that picture and for really going deep into what the numbers look like. Even for highlighting what we're looking at in terms of some of the systemic challenges that are facing women researchers, with the numbers being low. I would love to then extrapolate further on that. What exactly, should the continent be looking at in terms of trying to address, some of these systemic challenges?
Good question. If I may rephrase your question, Catherine, is how do we go about some of these systemic kind of challenges as a continent?
Yes.
I think there are two critical things that we probably need to look at. And one is, yes, we have individuals, but we have to create strong systems where research can thrive, where people can build a career in research, which addresses a system that addresses the inequalities that we see, that addresses the disadvantages, whether those disadvantages are because of the gender, whether those disadvantages are because of marginalization. We want a system that addresses that.
How would that system look like?
That kind of a system could have different things in it.
Yes.
One, it has to be well-resourced. You can't run away from that. Okay? Meaning you have the right infrastructure put in place. Resources do not only provide structures, but they also help us to build the capacity in terms of skills. You invest, for example, in training of trainers. Look at the person who trains Moses, who develops Moses, who coaches Moses, who mentors Moses. How good is that person? Let's start there, even before you think about the young researcher, because the products will be as good as those who produce them. So it's like the way we have an intervention, if I may give you the kind of the school situation, we have an intervention to help children read and read well.
Right.
But we forget about the teacher. The teacher is the one who teaches the students. Same thing with the research. Okay, you want to produce a good researcher. So there has to be good environment for doing the research. That's part of the ecosystem. There has to be good infrastructure for doing the research. There has to be those coaches, those mentors that are helping those young and upcoming researchers to do the research.
Great. Thanks a lot. And perhaps just to take you back still on the systemic issues and what a better system would look like. You had talked about young people being involved in informal research, perhaps as a solution, maybe as a way to keep them in the research ecosystem and in a pipeline to get into the level of being the research and not necessarily the research. What does the informal sector in research look like? Maybe how is it happening? Do you have examples?
Wonderful. About the informal research, let me also call it an ecosystem of its own. It's upcoming, okay?
Yes.
Now, again, we borrow a lot from what is existing, the informal sector. And here we talk about the technology, or we bring in the technology. Look at the kind of things that go on in the social media, content creation, innovations, sharing of the information and news and updates and all that. Okay, if you look at all those things, those are things that are critical and important for research to happen. Okay, so if you wanted to reach and to go far, and you are using the social media, you can very, very quickly conduct your research. For example, you can actually use social media as a source of data, as a source of information. And we can talk later about the dangers of doing that. That's okay. But that should not stop us from utilizing that opportunity. And I think that's where the issue of the informal knowledge generation is one of the areas that we can leverage on. Look at how many young people get into content creation. Okay? How then do you study that so that it can be even scaled up or replicated? Again, you look at it from a research perspective. And that's what I was talking about and thinking when I was mentioning about the informal sector in the context of research.
Right.
That's a good question. I have a bit of a follow-up to that.
Yes.
When we talk about that sort of like a informal research, there's also has been a legitimate fear, I'd argue, that the social media sites are not exactly, objective, for lack of a better word. And so that there has been fear that there's a lot of data that is also like getting lost. And of course, is deliberately suppressed as well. What is your take on that? If we want to approach research through that informal way, and tapping into existing tools like social media?
Interesting, Catherine. I think you are right. I think those kind of fears are genuine.
Okay.
And I think they cannot be ignored. Okay, because we have seen it. Just the same way you can do a good thing using the social media, we can also do, one can decide to do a bad thing using a social media. So because of that, yes, those fears are there. But remember, we are now in the age of AI, artificial intelligence, and we are not going back. I don't think there's anyone who's going back. Right now, even in our own smartphone, it tells and suggests many things for you, okay, based on what it has programmed you to be. Okay, or based on how it understands you. So, because we can't run away from that, I think for me, the best thing would be having some mechanisms of trying to distinguish what is good and what is not good. Okay, and I think there are protocols and ways of validating, of counter-checking. I tend to think probably we are moving very fast, and those kind of mechanisms are lagging way behind. But I think even the systems are getting there. Something else is what is the source? Remember, I have, for example, Moses is tweeting, for example, and I will tweet, for example, from the research that I've done, from researches that other people have done. An institution like APHRC is tweeting. It's gonna most likely tweet from the research that it has done, from the research from its researchers. So what we continuously encourage is to think about what's that source. Okay.
Yes.
Again, there could be other ways of validating other than just asking yourself about the question of the source. Those would be my reflection when it comes to the fears about it being abused, about it not giving us the credible information. I think there are mechanisms that we can and people can invest in so that those fears are not there.
Right, Dr. And still sticking on the technology angle or aspect, it seems that young people in the research ecosystem, they've had an influence or an impact. Are there any other areas or manner through which young people have impacted the research ecosystem or even influencing or changing it, technology aside? Yeah.
Again, good, even as we run away from the technology and young people, how else have they influenced the research ecosystem? I think, yes, other than them, coming up very strongly with the technology, ensuring that, everyone is getting into that space. Much as, even if you don't want, you have to think about that space. Okay?
Yes.
Sometimes we are even going out there to find out what is trading. And all this is being driven by young people. And that's why I like really, being in that space, because they can get it from all over. But apart from them using technology, how else are they getting engaged in research? I did give you an example of APHRC, where we have young people within certain cadres, and they are quite a number. Actually, every time you look at how is the research structured, you'll find that the base is very wide, meaning we have very many young people. And that's one way. And they lead, they support, they generate, they also write papers and produce and all those things. Remember, they can go sometimes where the older generation probably may not be able to go. They are energetic. So really, apart from technology, even physically being there to do the research, yes, they're also there. But apart from that, look at it from youth-serving organizations. Look at it from the youth networks. And some of these networks are quite huge, influential, wide, and they do a lot of work. Both in terms of programming, trying to implement interventions, and also in terms of supporting the ecosystem with not only the knowledge generation that we talked about, although we say it's data collection, and relegating them to data collectors is not a good thing. Okay, I think we need to go beyond that. But again, you can see the role of those youth-serving institutions and the youth networks, and then coming into the research ecosystem. Of course, if you look at all the people that are within the tertiary institution as students, okay, at whatever level, again, all these are young people, they are doing their masters, they are writing their PhDs. All this is knowledge. All this is research and evidence that I just mentioned that in Kenya alone, we have more than 40,000. Now, in Africa, we talked about 14 million. All those are people that are writing reports, that are generating evidence. And so, in addition to the technology, I think they are also really putting the evidence on the table.
Right.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Daktari. I want to sort of, take you a bit back into just your previous point about how young people are shaping that ecosystem and the sort of barriers that they incur during their work. I want to sort of, point out to something that you've pointed out about the number of people doing research and those that are, by comparison, doing it in other places. So in the past, we have heard that young people, like particularly in Kenya, they do like research, they do like online jobs, which are research focused. They also they're able to even like do PhDs, research for people outside in other jurisdictions. So it means that these are people who are very well resourced. These are people who are very knowledgeable in that research ecosystem. And yet, to tie it to your prior point about the space that young people have generally been relegated, which is like a lot of like enumeration work and a lot of like very junior research work that is mostly field related. I want to understand how that then can be sort of harnessed into like bringing up into making sure that, young people can like tap into their power and they can do all this work. Because if they are able to do all this work for other people, then it means that it's very possible for them to actually do it and to serve the society that they exist in, and to foster the growth of the research ecosystem. I want to understand what your take is on that.
Mm.
Yeah.
Good question and complicated, Catherine. Now, how do we bring young people, how do we leverage on that resource, that power, so that we can actually change the numbers that we are seeing in terms of research productivity from Africa? But back to the question of young people, let's say like writing PhDs for people in Europe.
Yes.
First of all, there is something positive there, in that they have the skills, they have the knowledge, they can do it. Okay? They're being innovative.
Absolutely.
Okay? We can deal with the issue of whether that's ethical later.
Yeah.
We can deal with that one later. But I think we are seeing something very, very positive that can be harnessed. When I mentioned about the informal sector knowledge,
yes,
this is part of the thing that I was talking about without using that example.
Right.
Okay? Because that is the informal sector
And it's the reality.
that is trying to drive, that is trying to generate knowledge. It is the same thing when you go to Kirinyaga Road and you find your driving mirror there being sold. Okay? Right?
Yes.
That's how informal sector operates. But of course, there is a way that we can harness that, because we are already seeing someone with the skills to do something.
Absolutely.
And I think if we make research less elitist, I think we start bringing them on board. Okay? And I'm not saying that they needed to write and we formalize PhDs and masters being written for someone. I'm not formalizing that.
Yes.
But is looking at the whole thing and the opportunity. Is there an opportunity that can be provided to those young people to actually do research? Maybe those are the ones that we should be looking for when we wanted to recruit. But you see, our recruitment system is formal. It does not recruit from the informal sector.
Correct. Somebody would not write in their CV that I did a PhD thesis for somebody in Massachusetts, for example.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
And yet that is proven research.
And that is proven research.
Proven expertise, they can do the job.
And the PhD passed.
Exactly.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
So how then do we look for that person? Probably that's the kind of thinking that we need to start having. How do we look for those people who are doing research and doing very good research and bringing them to a system, not necessarily formalizing the system, no, but bringing it into the system where then it is ethical.
Correct.
Okay?
Lowering the barriers of entry into the research ecosystem.
Absolutely. Lowering the barriers. What are those barriers that we need to overcome so that we can bring them on board? So that's something to think about. And it's not something that it can be done by one institution or two institutions. It is something that requires the industry players to really, really think about, for those who are working within the informal system. How do you regularize? Again, if I may borrow from the SME, an SME, if it is registered, it survives for long. But registering it does not make it formal, does not make it a non-SME. It is still an SME.
Right.
All right? But it helps it to survive. It helps it to do good business. It helps it to work over the board. Okay? And do the right thing. And the same thing can be done even within this kind of innovation with these young people who are doing all this. Yes, it is possible that they can also be supported to regularize certain things and also avoid doing certain things.
Right.
Because if you want then to analyze the data, then is it acceptable to analyze the data for you? If it's acceptable, then there I am. And I can do it. Okay? Instead of the PhDs that they are actually doing, research institutions, they have data that needs to be analyzed. Can that be? Can they be found and then do that? Because that's illegal. Okay. So again, if we start looking at it critically, we can get them out of the illegal ones and get them to the legal ones, and they still remain within the informal sector knowledge. Something else that can also be done, I think we need to also be deliberate in terms of giving them a voice. Instead of me, who has been doing research for more than 20 years, accepting that, yes, I think we are now in the era of, they are reaching to a point where you have to think about succession planning.
Right.
Okay? Where your role is now to coach, is now to train
the next generation.
Okay? The next generation. So that 2030, 2040, 2050, you are not going to be there. So who will be doing that research? The time to have them is now. When we realize that, we start providing them with opportunities to actually start leading from the front as we provide the support. Again, that's something else that could be done so that we can harness the power of the youth. And finally, something else that I could mention is the whole issue of the resources. We cannot run away from that, much as we say that sometimes, because when you want to have a good training,
yes,
then you have to bring a good trainer. And a good trainer is not cheap, it's expensive. So we have to, so having the systems that start looking at the resources and how the infrastructure looks like, having a system that is looking at how do we utilize the good skills that we're having in the informal knowledge generation, having a system that is thinking about where do we get our next gen of researchers. I think combination of all those things could really get us out of the kind of situation I explained to where we want to be.
Right. And perhaps not to stick too much on the example Catherine has provided us with, but it seems that for a young person to be writing theses and PhD theses rather for those in the global north, there is an element of employment. Are there any other motivations for young people entering the research ecosystem apart from employment? And has this changed across generation? Maybe what are the motivations and desires for young people to enter or to be involved in the research ecosystem?
Interesting and good question. Yes. Maybe I should tell you, why did I enter into research?
Yes, or how young people that you work with entered.
And then what am I seeing in the people that I work with as to why they are entering?
Yeah.
There may have been things that have changed, and there may be things that may not have changed. When I finished my PhD, I got an opportunity to work with other researchers, senior researchers that are outside the institution where I was working. And they would come with consultancies and those kind of things. I think they've been approached by international institutions to support them to generate the data, to analyze it, to write the report. Okay? So I started working with them. And I saw, this is looking interesting.
Yeah.
Why is it looking interesting? Because you'll go and generate data that no one else has. You tell the story.
Right.
No one knew that story. And I thought that was very interesting. And I said, I want to do more of this. This is where you see, okay, all those books I've been reading, all those things that I've been reading, this is what people did so as to have them on the table. Yeah. So that to me was very motivating in terms of putting that evidence, that story on the table so that others can read, just the same way I read. And the opportunity was provided by these other, experienced and what we call senior researchers that had networks and connections to access resources and being given assignments to go and do it in other countries. And actually, my first primary research was in South Sudan. Apart from my master's and PhD, the other one was in South Sudan. And that was during the time of war. So you can imagine how education looked like in that place. And it was very exciting to tell the world what's going on in there. And since then, I did not look back. So you can see what the motivation was. The motivation here was less of employment because I was already employed. Of course, one can always argue as a consultant, you are making an extra money, but that's fine. But what I found most interesting is what I just described about that generating that knowledge and wanting to solve something. Come to the current generation, there is the issue of the career, which was still there because I jumped out of teaching and I went into full-time research and thinking that this is what I need. This is where my passion is. It is not that teaching wasn't there. It was still there. But I said, I think, so there is the career, okay? And if I look at young people now, and I see a young person being very passionate on a certain issue, then I know there is something that he or she has experienced from his or her context, from the society. So young people tell us a lot about where you have evidence gaps without them having to read anywhere, because they have gone through it, they've experienced it, and they are passionate about it. And that's one of the very, very strong things that I see young people bringing to the ecosystem about what is that is going out there? What is that the society wants to understand? What is that we want to do? Of course, they also come with some solutions in terms of how we can do it. And that's where the social media, that's where the technology, that's where all the digital issues and things come in.
All right.
Yeah.
Wow. That is quite fascinating, about, just what influences people to go into research, and the reasons are quite varied. I would want to find out from you, what are some of the systemic barriers that young researchers face in the African ecosystem?
Good question. These are the barriers to entry into the research ecosystem.
Barriers to entry and also barriers to being retained.
Even to moving up.
And moving up.
Exactly, scaling up.
I'll put it in different ways,
yes.
because there isn't one barrier. Also, different systems or institutions have different, way on how people move up the ladder. So there is both entry and there is also climbing through the ladder. But before I go there, again, this whole issue of employment, the research ecosystem and the research in itself provides an opportunity for people to get employment. I think we cannot run away from that.
Absolutely.
Okay. But of course, there are usually other drivers, because we have seen people leave research to go and do other things.
Yes.
Okay, meaning then it's not only employment that was driving them. Okay.
Indeed.
And not only employment in research. There is employment also elsewhere. Okay. But back to the question on the barriers to entry. And in terms of entry, the biggest barrier for young people is the skill, is the qualification. Because formal institutions, that's the first thing they go for.
Right.
They look at qualification, they look at experience. Of course, they'll also look at the values. Okay, so those three things becomes very critical in terms of entry. So you then ask ourselves, how then do we train our researchers? It's very unlikely that you'll get a master's straight from school, and the person fits into a research project without probably getting some, support in terms of exposure.
Does that therefore mean that the education system is not exactly like training researchers or the universities? Is that the message here?
I think, Catherine, the message here is our higher education institutions have issues in terms of quality. Okay, in terms of the curriculum, in terms of how you train a researcher. If you go to the university, and I've taught there, we train you to get we teach you, not train you, we teach you to get your master's. We teach you to get your PhD. All right?
Okay.
As opposed to train you to be a researcher. Okay?
Yes.
So those are two different things.
Right.
And this is why you'll find And you can Google and look elsewhere. You'll find in our African institutions, one of the weakest departments is the research division within our universities.
Would you attribute that? Would you attribute that? I want to stick on that a bit. Would you attribute that to the trainer or the resources, or is it a mixture of both?
It's a mixture.
I see.
Of both. And I can give a quick example. And I'm not saying that there are no good things that they are doing. There are certain very good things that they are doing, especially when they have, let's say, specific projects, specific programs. Those specific programs are sometimes well-resourced. All right?
Yes.
University of Nairobi is working with Harvard. Is working with a project funded by USAID.
Resources, yes.
Is working with the Cambridge. So you see resources and exposure to expertise, to external expertise. All right? So there are certain things that institutions are doing very, very well. But you find that those are specific projects or programs. But majority then, if you're not in those kind of a situation, then you're going to be... You go to class, you are taught.
Yes.
It's your time to go and collect the data. You go and collect the data, you come and analyze it. You get your PhD, you've met the criteria, we give you your master's or PhD. Really, it needs to be more than that. And those are some of the things that, for example, APHRC tries to address through the Consortium for Advanced Research Training in Africa, CATA, where you look at, this person is already enrolled in an institution. How do we improve the kind of process and exposure and experience this person is going to get by the time this person finishes? Whether it's in terms of training in research methods, whether it's in terms of exposure to a very well-trained and prepared supervisor. So because of that, Unified Carter even has modules and programs and interventions for supervisors. Because if you go to majority of your universities, what you'll find is no one tells you how to supervise.
Yes, you get a PhD, you go straight to the classroom because already you have a PhD. So nobody is teaching you how to, in fact, teach or even how to train or how to teach researchers. So I think...
so you can see one of the barriers in terms of how we do it, all that. Now, the other barrier, again, into... and there we were talking about the quality of the person that is going to come and enter. So when you are now looking at the quality of that person, then you see this person has a potential. So because of the potential, many times they are offered opportunities, and then you can develop all those skills because you are able to demonstrate the potential. Then you can develop those skills within the job. But really, where you are coming from, there is a lot that needs to be done. That's in terms of the entry points. Let's talk a little bit about climbing the ladder. In many institutions that I'm aware of, that I know of, that have good structures, good systems, climbing the ladder is more of an issue of productivity. Right? And also the issue of values. All right? And values could, they are wide. They could talk about issues of work culture, for example. They could talk about issues of interpersonal relations, interpersonal skills, even before you go to the technical skills and expertise. I think there are all those that are important that when they are put together, then they can dictate and determine how one climbs the ladder. So for a young person who, for example, joins an institution like APHRC, it doesn't matter whether you are male or female. If, for example, every year the expectation is you need to have managed a research project. When you manage a research project, you get the skills of conducting the research, of doing it, of delivering. You get the skills of quality assurance and all that. But in addition, there could be something like research productivity. How many policy briefs? Do you write? How many papers? How well do you interact with the policymakers and the research audience, for example?
Okay.
How much do you disseminate, engage, so that your research gets taken up? All those things put it together.
Yes.
They again determine. Remember, I also talked about the values and interpersonal skills and all that. That's very, very. Those are the non-negotiables in many institutions.
Right. Yeah,
even if you're an expert, even if you can write a paper like Moses, you have first of all to fulfill that one.
Sure.
So for you to move then from one ladder to another, from one step to another, then there are those very clear, straightforward. And if institutions have that, then it should be straightforward. Of course, having said that, that's the ideal. I do know.
Just going to ask about that. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. I do know that we have issues in our African institutions.
Absolutely.
In terms of, again, and I'll go straight to issues of sexual harassment, favors, unequal treatment. I go back to the point I made about systems. If an institution does not have strong systems to check on those things, and not by name, not on paper, actually practicing it.
Yes.
Okay, for example, like you have even where you work, you have your sexual harassment policies. That's something that, if not well implemented,
right,
it has to have a guardian. It has to have a system that helps people to use it and use it well, because it is something that can prevent people from, climbing that ladder and being promoted. Okay, another example. On the downside, and why people sometimes they find it difficult is, again, as a person, if then I don't concentrate on those things that we said I have to do for me to climb the ladder. All right? If I don't concentrate, if I don't make it, then of course I cannot climb. But I usually put a caveat there. For you to hold someone accountable, you have to give that person the resources that are needed.
Right.
You have to ensure that that person has the capacity. It is your responsibility to ensure that the person has the skills to do it. You have to provide the enabling environment for the person to do it. So it's not just me being lazy.
Right.
I think you have to prove beyond any reasonable doubt that Moses cannot be promoted because he did not fulfill the requirements.
Right.
I think you have to go beyond that. That's an issue of systems within our organizations.
I think just sticking to the systems, Dr. I had wanted to ask, you've mentioned that in order for a young researcher to climb or to get to the next level, you have to fulfill certain requirements, research productivity, but sometimes you'll find despite doing all of that, there's a cap someone reaches. And we've talked about systems and succession planning. If even for yourself as a senior researcher, you're not able to progress to the next level, and there are those succession issues because the system is not working, then what does that mean for a young researcher or early career researcher, moving to the next level? Maybe you can speak to those systemic issues, despite, having fulfilled all the requirements and, maybe being the most productive researcher at the institution, there still sometimes seems to be a cap that can help you move to the next level.
Good question, Sylvia. What do you do?
That's what you're asking.
When you're stuck. Okay. There are many things that a young researcher can do. First of all, you have to be sure that, yes, it is the system that is not working. All right? So the solution then lies with both sides. There's something that this young researcher or person can do, and there is also something that the institution should do. Let's start with the institution. I think it's good to appreciate that a system that functions well is a good system, and that's what is good for Africa. And we have to appreciate that, which then speaks to the whole governance structure, which speaks then to the board, or, going beyond the management to actually the institutional board. Of course, also the management, okay? Revisiting the system and embracing dynamism. We want to be dynamic. We want a place where researchers can thrive, okay? We should not be looking, there should be no, I'm being held because the system is not working. I think we will let down Africa when we don't address and we don't interrogate.
Absolutely.
But on the other side, for the individuals, there is both the issue of agency.
Yes.
Okay? You need to speak it up. You need to talk about it. And you need to tell the system. Of course, there will be consequences.
That is, in fact, what I wanted to ask you. Consequences are always glaring. If I take you back to your previous point where you're talking about, sexual harassment, for example, women in particular are often the most targeted demographic.
Yes.
And whenever they speak up, they are targeted. And of course, now just like tying it to everything else, it always comes with certain sets of consequences. How do we?
Yes. Good question. Good question. And I'll come back to that after I tell you one last point about what young people can do to change that. And then we can come to the sexual harassment and probably give you the example of the case of APHRC and how that's done. Now, in the agency, I think it's the voice. It's the speaking about the things that we think that they are not working and working well. And we need to be very candid and encourage young people, give young people space to talk about it so that they can tell you the things that are not working well, so that those things can work. The voice. That's very, very important. Of course, as I said, if systems are dynamic, then of course there is an opportunity. But as a young person, it's also okay to jump ship. Don't get stuck in a system that is not working. I say that openly. I say it many times.
Yeah.
All right? I've been at APHRC almost 18 years.
Yeah.
So when I say people should jump ship if it's not working, I'm sure my boss will not say, are you telling people to run away? I'm not run away. So it's not risky to say that.
Yeah.
If a system, and I stick because the system is working. So if a system is not working, as a young person, it's okay to explore another opportunity. Okay, that's the point that I don't mention. Let's go back to the sexual harassment. You see, as I said, it's one thing to have a policy. The policy spells out the intentions, why they should not be done, what's going to happen to you if you do it, etc. But how do you implement it? And I think that's where the danger is. And even in the court of law, you know that. Even when you go to the police, there are always those issues. How do you prove it? Okay? I think one is you need a leadership. And this is the kind of leadership that we have at APHRC. You need a leadership that talks about it, that it demystifies, that is not something that you only talk about it when things have happened. You need to be proactive. That's one. That needs to be cascaded to all levels of leadership. That this is something that probably needs to be non-negotiable. This is something that we need to ensure deliberately go out. So that's one. Two, you have safeguarding measures. For example, where do I report anonymously if it happens to me? And if I report, what kind of measures are supposed to? Is there a team that we think that if people feel it is objective, that can investigate that? And all those things happen. Okay? And because of that, then you'll have very few cases and very, very minor cases. And that's the experience that we are having because you have a system in place that works. The minute we know that it will be ignored, the minute we know that nothing will happen, of course, no one will report. And of course, it becomes rampant. But the minute we have a system that works, that responds, I think those things will be minimized. I'm not saying that it will be eliminated. Because they are always, for example, many will always come up with very many arguments.
Right.
Like, no, it was, we were talking, or we had agreed, or that I think she got it wrong. That's not what I was talking about. So there are all those kind of things. So because of that, have a system that is working and ensure that it's being implemented. If you don't have, of course, I talked about the leadership.
Yes.
If the leadership is not supportive, even though those things are not going to work. That's how we practice it at APHRC.
Yes, and it's been great and very encouraging to hear about the systems and how they're working at APHRC. But can you speak to perhaps other viable solutions that would help to create a more conducive research ecosystem for young people, not only to enter, but to thrive in it. Are there any other examples you've seen through your 20 years of experience in the system, and perhaps other examples continentally? What is working? Yeah, what can we look up to? What can we emulate?
Okay, great. And I think I'll zero on one, and it's about training and coaching, which is very critical, because I told you, even to enter that space, someone will want to ask you, Catherine and Sylvia, let me see your experience. Tell me how to design this kind of a study, regardless of the papers that you have. Tell me how this one can be designed. So, and for you to get that, you need the right experience, you need the right exposure to skills, to all that. So, opportunities that providing young people with that kind of exposure becomes very, very important. And this where, for example, like the internship programs, this where you have, the young people joining and them being exposed to research projects, allowing them to manage it. I think the more we do that, the more we get within the ecosystem, the more we get people that do understand the research and they can conduct very good research. Of course, that calls for the experienced ones, the senior ones, to also do effective coaching, effective mentorship, and effective training. That, to me, is very, very critical, over and above the environment. The environment is very, very important.
Yes.
And this is where even the issue that we were talking about, harassment, comes in, because you need a good environment. Look at Bardos and internet. You really cannot do research if you're having challenges with that. And someone needed to pay for that. Someone needs to provide that. That's very, very, very important. And those are infrastructure related kind of things. So when we expose then young people, to me, to those capacity, and we have very good models. Again, I go back to APHRC. We have short courses that are provided by our research and related capacity strengthening. And then the researchers come in, like me and others, to train in that. They could be 2 days, 3 days, 1 week, 1 month, and they are tailor-made.
Right.
So these people, they really needed to collect good data. So what do they need? This team really need to design a good research. What kind of knowledge and skills do they need, etc. And I think those kind of models, they do work. We've seen them work. And even the people that we later on go to the ecosystem and hire, you find that some of them have gone through that. And when we also meet them outside the APHRC spaces, you find that they're actually thriving and they can remember about the experience that they got from APHRC. But, as is always said, in Africa, you need more than one APHRC. Africa is huge. It's over 1.7 billion people.
Exactly. We need that replicated.
You need to replicate that, and we need more. We just like a drop in the ocean.
Absolutely. Well, Daktari, this has been a very insightful conversation. Thank you for honoring our invite, and we really look forward to having a world where the research ecosystem really caters to and is able to grow young African researchers. So asante sana. Yes. And so that has been our episode for today, whereby we were joined by Dr. Moses Ngware from APHRC, and we're looking at research and academia through the youth perspective. I've been your host, Sylvia Mwendia, and
I'm Catherine Amai.
Yes, to find out more about the work we're doing at Mawazo Institute in supporting African women researchers, please visit our website, www.mawazoinstitute.org, and see you next time.